You're listening to Cards to the Moon, a podcast about trading cards from both a collector and investor perspective. We hope you'll stick around for the ride as we take a deep dive into the state of the hobby, share some hot takes, hopefully some useful advice, and fun stories along the way. Hey, welcome to another Friday edition of Cards to the Moon. My name is Clark from 5cardguys.com and 5cardguys on Instagram. I'm doing this intro solo today, but we'll have the whole crew back for next Tuesday's episode. Okay, as we've done the last few Friday episodes now, we'll play another joint pod episode I did with Paul Hickey of the Sports Card Strategy Show in just a bit. But I'm glad that some of you have already reached out saying they've enjoyed this collaboration. It's been a lot of fun for me. And you know, I'm hoping to do more collabs in 2025 as we're quickly approaching the new year. And as we wrap up 2024, heading into the final month of the year, I just want to give you guys, the listeners, a shout out for tuning in week after week. You know, when I look at some of the show analytics, it's pretty incredible that we get thousands of plays across all platforms for each episode. And I know that encourages me and Hyung and John as well to keep putting out weekly episodes and just keep talking about the hobby that we all love. So thanks again, guys. And one more thing, I was initially going to start this in the new year, but the more I think about it, I think that the Cards to the Moon newsletter that we put out monthly for free, I'm going to commit starting in December to putting out this newsletter weekly. So if you're interested in keeping touch that way, just go to 5cardguys.substack.com and you can sign up there. I'll put the links in the show notes below. And I'm also hoping to do more giveaways in 2025 and even some exclusively for our newsletter subscribers. All right, without further ado, here's the episode I did with Paul Hickey. We talk football cards and more specifically when to bail on certain QBs, as well as discuss whether pitchers deserve more hobby love in light of the attention that Paul Skeens is bringing to that position recently. Okay, enjoy, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday. All right, we're back with another joint collaboration, joint podcast with myself, Clark from 5cardguys and the Cards to the Moon podcast. And of course, we have Paul Hickey here, nooffseason.com and the Sports Card Strategy Show. So good to see you again, Paul.
Good to see you too.
Ready to go?
Ready to go, man. Let's talk some sports cards. I'm excited.
Yeah, and you know what? I've been getting really good positive feedback on our interaction. So I'm always looking forward every 2 weeks to see what we're going to talk about. And I kind of teased this last episode because we kind of ran out of time. But I'm going to just start right off the bat. And it's more of a football card question because, a lot of us Canadians, we don't really pay attention to football. Actually, the Toronto Argonauts just won the Grey Cup, and I didn't even know that. So they're our hometown team. So that's how much we pay attention to football. But I am on a fantasy football team, so I do pay attention to the NFL. And I know you collect football cards or you buy football cards. And for the benefit of a lot of our Canadian listeners from the Sports Card Strategy Show and even Cards to the Moon, I had a specific question, all right? And QBs get all the attention, right? And we're going to just stick with QBs. So my question is, at the beginning of the season, we might be high on certain QBs, and we might buy their cards in the off season. But now that we're more than halfway through the season, we've seen a lot of busts, and I'm wondering at what point do you bail on a QB and sell for a loss? And I'm thinking of guys like Bryce Young, Trevor Lawrence, even Dak Prescott, Tua. I mean, the list is pretty long this year. Or do you just hold on to them hoping they turn things around? And Anthony Richardson's kind of a good example because he's been really doing well the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's a great question. And certainly you're right. There's a lot of risk with football cards. I think that maybe I think each sport has its own element of risk. Football's risk is injury.
Yes.
Injury and underperformance because you've got an 18-week season. I've always said that I think the NFL is the best soap opera on the planet mainly because of fantasy football. I mean, you've got
right.
all the different injury designations and what do they mean. And you've got, the press conferences and the news, and everybody really for the last like almost 30 years has been scouring all to get all the information they can get for their fantasy leagues, which makes it super intriguing. And then on top of that, you obviously have the real football on the field, which is a great product. Injuries happen all the time. We've always seen players sometimes go down in the preseason, unfortunately, that are the stars. Sometimes you have players go down during the regular season. The other risk with NFL is just underperformance. Like you've got from a week by week basis, if a player doesn't put up the expected stats and if their team doesn't win, their card prices can definitely suffer. I think this year, though, we definitely have seen a trend where even the top players have gone down in value, and that really relates to like hobby hype. And I know you guys have a phrase, hobby logic, that you use a lot, and I don't know if this qualifies as hobby logic, but there's something that happens with sports card values in the NFL offseason. The trend typically is that they go up from the end of the Super Bowl all the way through June. They dip down a bit in June, making June a nice little buying pocket for a lot of guys, because there's really nothing in the news cycle in June for the NFL. It's really like one of the only months. It's like one of maybe 2 months that there's nothing in the news cycle for the NFL. And then back in July, when the teams kind of hit training camp again and the national happens, those two things start to mix together of like, okay, card prices start to go on the rise. So we typically tell people at the Sports Card Strategy Show and at nooffseason.com, liquidate all your NFL cards in August so that you can mitigate the risk of the injuries and the underperformance. But now getting to your question, the way that I would answer that, because certainly there's people that hold their cards into the season, sometimes just because things happen so fast in people's lives, they might mean to liquidate something in August, but maybe they're like, hey, I didn't get a chance to. And now all of a sudden 2 weeks later, the card's worth, literally 20% of what it was worth 2 weeks before that. So the real answer is it depends on the player's resume. And so not just their resume in real life, but also like their hobby hype, hobby logic resume.
Okay.
So like last episode that we did together, you also mentioned like Derek Carr and Aaron Rodgers. I mean, on top of like a lot of the names that you've already mentioned, I think CJ Stroud and Jordan Love and are two guys that have gone down quite a bit. And so when you look at Jordan Love's Prism, let's look at his Prism Silver PSA 10. That was easily a $1,200 card in August, and that's a $725 card right now. And the Packers are in the playoff picture,
right?
So like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to somebody new to the hobby. if Jordan, if that's a card that you have, or even his base Prism PSA 10, which is down significantly from where it was at the beginning of the season. His Optic Hollow PSA 10 is literally half the price. It's $154. It was easily close to a $300 card back in the offseason. You look at his resume. So you look at, okay, so, he's got some pretty high draft capital. He just signed. I believe he's the highest paid quarterback in the NFL right now. Believe it or not, I think him and Tua actually are from like a guaranteed money standpoint. That'll change obviously in the offseason, but for now, I mean, so you start to look at it, and then you look at how did he play last year in his first season as a starter. Well, he got red hot like right around this time last year, and he's always had a lot of hobby hype. So to me, to answer your question, Jordan Love would be a guy that I would consider holding on to. If you're 50% down on him, his trajectory is that he could make it into the playoffs. He's young. He still has everything happening for him, and there's a reason why he went down. Like he was injured in the first week, week one, and so okay now. I would also put CJ Stroud in that hold category because, and this is kind of shocking. I think I know some of the reason why this has happened in CJ Stroud's market. I think there are two main reasons. His Prism Silver PSA 10 rookie from 2023 is right now a $435 card. That also was over $1,000.
Yeah, wow.
So now you're looking at like less than 40% value on that card from August, July.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting about CJ Stroud to me are two things. Number one, when the abomination that is Topps Composite Football was released,
Okay.
that skyrocketed CJ Stroud's amount of rookie cards
Yeah.
to literally over 20,000 different rookie cards.
Oh, that's a lot.
So from where they were, I actually think I don't know for sure, but I think he was easily under 4,000, which is without Topps Composite, he was still going to end up having 7,000 rookie cards, but over 20,000.
That's insane.
Combined with the fact that even though the Texans are a very good team this year, he's not playing well. He's clearly going through like a sophomore slump of sorts in the stat column. But like Jordan Love, he's still on likely a playoff bound team. There's no reason why he shouldn't come back and have some spike weeks. And I don't know that one or two spike weeks will get him back to where he was in the valuations of his cards, but I do believe over the long term he will get there. And so he and Jordan Love to me would be holds. Now, you mentioned Anthony Richardson. That's an interesting one. Let's come back to him real quick. I want to go to Bryce Young. Bryce Young and Will Levis were hot.
Yeah.
They would have been great players to sell during July and August as well.
Right.
Many of us, including myself, I held a couple of each because I thought, well, hey, like, what if there is a spike week? Well, obviously the opposite happened with both of those guys. While people like Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff have like come back from, irrelevant,
security. Yeah.
Insecurity. That's a great word. To now all of a sudden being actually like top players at the position.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily see Bryce Young and especially not Will Levis ever really having that kind of success. So to me, I think like we all have to do in cards sometimes, just cut your losses. I think I just don't know. Now, Anthony Richardson, I probably would have been very worried about him had he not had the week that he just had this past weekend.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, it's a good example of what can happen. Like he comes out, he beats the Jets in a game-winning rushing touchdown in the fourth quarter in New Jersey, has two rushing touchdowns, throws for almost 280 yards and a passing touchdown. Now it's like, okay, this is the guy that we all thought he was. The problem with him is going to be inconsistency. He's going to have some really bad weeks. He's probably going to get injured again. So I would say, depending on how far you are into Anthony Richardson cards, now might be a good time to sell. If you're not too far underwater with him, or it might be a good opportunity to at least liquidate some of your Anthony Richardson portfolio to mitigate some risk that it could go back down again, because he is up, to your point, in most of his top cards are up at least 38 or more percent over the last 14 days. In his like top graded, his top PSA 10s basically are all up 38 or more percent, including his Prism Silver PSA 10, his Optic Hollow PSA 10. So you can get some of your money back. He's a tough one though. He could be one where maybe you buy him on the way up potentially, because his Prism Silver was a $500 card in August. It sold actually for almost $600 a couple times. It's only $173 right now. That might not be a good little, that could be a good little quick flip to get that under 200. Maybe it goes up to 350 and then you sell it.
Yeah.
Low risk move there if you're looking to maybe kind of go the opposite way, go against the grain. But I think with guys like some of the other guys that you talked about the last time we talked, Aaron Rodgers, Derek Carr, and let me know if you have anybody else on your list. To me, they fall into a different category. They have obviously older cards. Carr, I think, is from 2014, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that. And Rodgers is obviously from 2005, I believe, his rookie card. So like I what I've seen, even with Jared Goff, who's actually only like, he's from 2016, so it's not that old. He's got an
Yeah.
updated design, optic rated rookie, and serial. I mean, he has contenders rookie ticket autos that look like the more modern ones that have come out the
Right.
last few years. So even Jared Goff's cards from 2016 take quite a bit of spike weeks in a row for them to go back up in value, let alone going all the way back to 2005 with Aaron Rodgers and 2014, I think, with Derek Carr. So to me, like you probably aren't going to see Aaron Rodgers cards, even though he might be considered one of the top quarterbacks of all time when it's all said and done. Unfortunately, I don't like the guy. If anyone's ever listened to the Sports Card Strategy Show, they know that. But Derek Carr too, I just don't see them. I think you probably just need to get rid of those guys because I think they're on their way down.
Okay. No, that's a great lesson. And you know what? The key things I got were I'm gonna buy Jordan Love and CJ Stroud. Looks like a good buy
I think
low
they're great
opportunity
buys right now, man. I think
Yeah.
they're great buys. Right now. I mean, and so with Trevor Lawrence, Trevor Lawrence is another great one that you mentioned because I kind of forgot about him.
Right.
He has so many rookie cards.
Yeah.
He had his own set with Topps before Topps, was even really making football cards again in 2021. And then, of course, Panini printed the crap out of him. And,
Right.
and he had a lot of XRCs like Leaf and Pro Set did a lot of Trevor Lawrence cards. So he's just he was very, very overpriced, expensive to buy into, has drastically underperformed.
Yeah.
He's been given a lot of excuses. I think the hobby is pretty much over him. I don't know that I would buy him, and I feel bad for anyone who still has his cards because I don't know that there's any bouncing back from his cards. Very, very low gem rate in the 2021 product as well, which I know sometimes can be a good thing because it creates rarity in a PSA 10. But I think in Trevor Lawrence's case, it's just like
Yeah.
we're all SOL on that. We just
Right.
got to cut bait and move on.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I wasn't really into football cards, but the hype was unreal for Trevor Lawrence a few years ago. So yeah. Totally understand that. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I really want to ask you that question. So I was, learned a couple of valuable lessons there. You had a question too about baseball. We're kind of switching sports now.
Yeah, let me fire you a baseball question here.
Yes.
So, because you and your teammates over at Cards to the Moon, like you guys bring a wealth of knowledge in baseball, and I actually heard you and Hyung talking about the pitchers. Obviously there hasn't really been a big market for pitchers. They haven't been investable in recent years, but I heard you guys kind of mentioning with the emergence of Paul Skeens, with obviously Ohtani,
Right.
Being the dual threat, multi-threat that he is, not just dual threat, but just, he can basically do it all. And then you've got guys like, Yamamoto coming over. There was some hype around him.
Yeah.
Roki Sasaki could be like the next guy that falls into the Ohtani and Yamamoto category coming over from Japan.
Yeah.
And then even Kumar Rocker sort of comps to a guy that could be an investable pitcher. So my question for you is like, has Paul Skeens and his success changed the landscape of pitchers potentially becoming investable? He's obviously not the first pitcher to be taken number one overall in the draft and have hype around him, but he has been really the first pitcher that the hobby has gravitated to as an investable pitcher. So what do you think in terms of what the market looks like for pitchers moving forward?
Great question. And this is, I think it was on our last podcast episode. We have a friend, his name's Chris Begg. He's the host of the Apple Taco podcast show, and he was a professional pitcher. He was drafted by the Giants, I believe, San Francisco Giants. And last time he was on our podcast, we were making fun of him for saying pitchers, you just can't invest in pitchers, and it's just a risk. And it's like, injury risk is higher with pitchers because they obviously throw the ball a ton. But honestly, I think Paul Skeens has definitely changed the narrative. Like I think one of the reasons why Paul Skeens has been able to really change the narrative is his sheer dominance and doing it in his rookie season. just it's been incredible to watch. And at the same time, for me personally, Young might feel a little differently because I feel like he's more all in on Skeens and just like really looking again at pitchers as an investable asset in the hobby. But I'm still, tiptoeing closer to the line of whether, like Skeens would be a good guy to definitely invest in. But and he just won Rookie of the Year yesterday as of this recording, right? So the hype is building on Paul Skeens, and everyone's looking forward to seeing him in year 2. And that certainly brought attention. And you mentioned some good names like Yamamoto. Of course, he just won the World Series as well, so he's building his resume. And Roki, of course, is going to be. Sadly, he probably will play for the Dodgers too, so that's going to be a championship caliber team. There's something real to it. But at the same time, I am personally just, other than, I feel like those are the exceptions still. That's my personal point of view. I think just the fact that pitchers are throwing a lot harder. And I think that's still an issue. And I think it's being, it'll be more of an issue when the season begins and you start to see like more pitchers on the injury list, and that's going to be a reoccurring theme, I think. Just tread with caution. That's my word of advice in terms of pitchers. And really the the days of pitchers pitching 200 plus innings, they used to be given for like top tier pitchers. Not nowadays, that's not even a given, right? And the ones that you can really invest in are the ones we keep repeating on Cards to the Moon is Clayton Kershaw, Justin Verlander, and Max Scherzer, the sure Hall of Famers. They already got the resume. Everything that they're doing now is just bonus, right? But these newer pitchers coming up, sure, they could maybe pitch 200 innings this season, but how many consecutive seasons can they do that? It's really hard to do that these days just by how hard they're throwing and the mechanics and even if they're not throwing that many innings, even if the coaches are maybe a little more progressive and they want to give them rest and maybe only have them pitch 6 innings max, then that also limits their upside because they're only pitching 150 innings a season and they're getting great starts out of them, but they're definitely not getting the strikeouts, the counting stats that used to matter a lot for pitchers, and the 3,000 and wins are hard to come by as well because it's so random too. If you're pitching less, a lot can happen during the middle and late innings that get you out of that win column, So all these things I think contribute in the long term in terms of like which pitchers will actually be really great investments because a lot of them will have, I believe, sadly, shorter careers than what pitchers like Kershaw, Verlander, and Scherzer have now. And that's kind of in a nutshell. But it's exciting while it lasts. I mean, short-term flips, I think Paul Skeens is worth the risk, in my opinion. He just is so dominant. He kind of reminds me of Pedro Martinez when back in the day when, it just seems like no one could hit his pitches. And it's so fun to watch. It's last thing I'll say is, usually watching dominant pitching is boring when you go to a baseball game. It's like, oh, it's a 0-run score for the other team. But when a pitcher's dominant, striking out double digits, you're like, wow, okay, let's see if he can strike out number 11 and 12. When you're actually rooting for the pitcher, that says something about the pitcher's talent and how he's kind of a step above the rest. So Skeens is kind of in its own elite category right now, I would say.
Yeah, that's a great breakdown. I mean, a lot of good stuff right in there. I mean, I think we get a lot of questions on our premium podcast and about baseball, and one of them came up recently, why aren't pitchers investable? And I think you just named so many good reasons why they're tricky investments. And I love the proceed with caution that you're talking about, because I think one of the things that happens in the hobby is that people definitely try to find the next person, which I'm a proponent of, but I think there's some potential danger in doing that. People are trying to find the next Caitlin Clark right now. People are trying to find, and so a couple follow-up questions for you on the pitchers. If you had to pick one out of the names that we've talked about, say Kumar Rocker, Yamamoto, Sasaki, even Ohtani coming back as a pitcher, I'm curious to your take on how he's going to do in 2025 with his card values. Yep. If you had to pick, or maybe it's someone I haven't mentioned, if you had to pick a pitcher that you think is most likely to be the next Paul Skeens in the context of maybe not as dominant, but in the context of his card values will go up in the next year, would you say, I mean, would you stick to your Scherzer, Verlander, Kershaw 3 and that's it? Or is there a name outside of those 3 that you would take a flyer on?
I'm pretty conservative when it comes to pitchers. So the 3 I mentioned, the sure Hall of Famers, they're always on my watch list, and,
Yep.
and Kershaw, like, he's definitely gone up, but he's been injured much of last season. He'll probably make it, I'm thinking, 1 more season, maybe 2. And so he's going to retire soon. And I think he's a great buy because his card prices have certainly come down a little bit. But if I'm going to risk, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know too much about Kumar Rocker, so I can't really say much on him. But Roki is definitely, his prices are already trending upwards. So there's how much more can it go up? I'm not sure, and he doesn't have a lot of cards yet. So I'm sure by the time his cards come out, I feel like the hype's going to already be there. So you're buying a little bit high. Yamamoto, I think, is process of elimination. Yamamoto will be probably the guy because his card prices have definitely, there's a lot printed now, different brands, and you could find one that's probably within your budget. Nice on-card, autograph card, lower parallel number. And I think Yamamoto is, you've seen it in the World Series.
His Stadium Club auto, I think, actually is one that has sold quite a bit recently. Raw, that seemed like it was a reasonable price. And so, that's a great point about Yamamoto. I know Roki Sasaki has the NPB Topps Chrome from 2021. It doesn't say RC on it or anything special, but it's definitely like his I would say most liquid card. Maybe there's a raw to grade play there. Interesting that you say he's probably going to go to the Dodgers. That would be that. I mean, it seems logical for sure, but that would be insane. Just absolutely insane. Super team. Obviously, I'm sort of a little bit bummed that I don't have Skeens in my top 5. I can't buy him in 2025, which is okay. It's okay. Like, there's a purpose for that. But I do have Ohtani, so maybe there's a play there with him coming back pitching in 2025. We'll see.
Awesome.
Yeah, man, good stuff on the pitchers. It sounds like Clark Kim from 5 Card Guys and Cards to the Moon podcast just basically says there is no next Paul Skeens. You got to go back to the Hall of Fame guys potentially, or stick with Skeens, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's definitely a viable option. Yeah,
I like it. Sometimes there is no next XYZ person. It's just that. But we all, I mean, especially hobbyists want, like, the foregone conclusion is that there is a next person. But that's not always the case.
Right.
So
exactly.
Got to keep everything in context. And I know we've only got a few minutes left here, but the last thing on our potential agenda was, did you have a question for me about my 5 players? Just a quick overview on that.
I know, and you teased us last time we were on together. You said, just to provide context, that you were, for 2025, looking to invest really just in these 5 players, like focused more on the 5 players instead of a lot of different players. And I thought I think. And you could please tell us for our Cards to the Moon listeners who are your top 5. But I really want you to explain to me Archie Manning. That's the one that seems like the one odd person out of that 5. Like the other 4, I'm like, yeah, I understand totally. But Archie, okay, yeah. So that's my question.
Okay, sounds good. I love it. So yeah, my 5 are Ohtani. For him, I wanted to pick players that mainly. Like, there's going to be no more rookie print run for. So the market's established, but that there's potential selling markers coming up. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think Ohtani coming back and pitching in 2025. And him winning the World Series took a little bit away from that potentially happening and being like an extra. I don't know that like a second World Series necessarily would bump up his pricing, and I think sometimes that can be detrimental to buy in after a player's won their first championship. But I do think he's not, and you guys have talked about Ohtani like just always being up and to the right. So
Yeah.
I share a brain with you guys on that, where it's like, I wanted kind of like a safer investment in my portfolio. So I would say that 20% is pretty safe. I picked Michael Jordan because I wanted to go vintage. I've never really gone vintage, and I think there's a lot that I need to learn about Michael Jordan's card market. I think there's opportunities with the star cards that people don't. The market is not established for the star cards that PSA only started grading, I believe, in 2023. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in Michael Jordan's card market that I've never really looked into. Plus, anytime I've ever held a Michael Jordan card, it's typically has not dipped in value, which I like. So I think Ohtani and Jordan are pretty safe. The other three, Victor Wembanyama, mainly because his print run of rookie cards should be done fairly quickly. I mean, there might be some Panini high-end releases that come out, but they probably won't. They're not going to have his autos because he's obviously in Topps Mercury and he's Fanatics exclusive, and that's already hit the market. So I've seen his prices come down quite a bit, which I like because I believe in him as a long-term player. I believe that he's going to have a quadruple double. I believe that's going to be a significant selling marker. I think the raw to grade is going to be there with his base cards, but then also I think his Prism Silver right now is underpriced compared to where it'll be when he eventually makes a playoff run. I just think he's the real deal as a player, so I wanted to keep him on my list. Plus, I always say don't buy into a player's rookie cards really until maybe 3 to 6 months after their last rookie card has come out, because that's typically when you can get their true market. So the other two, Caitlin Clark, just because I believe that she's kind of an anomaly, almost like Shohei, where I just think she's going to continue to rise in value. And then I'll get to Arch Manning here at the end, but I gave myself 2 hall passes because I had a lot of people reach out to me and say, you need to give yourself some kind of hall pass in case there's some kind of opportunity that comes up in the next 14 months so that you don't miss out on it. And so I disagreed, but I also kind of agreed with that thought. And what I decided to do, I didn't want to give myself that where I could just buy anything based on what comes up, because that actually kind of defeats the purpose of what I'm trying to do. So what I decided to do is allow myself to buy into 2 individual additional players, but only for their Topps Now cards. Maybe Panini Instant, but probably only Topps Now. And that's Cooper Flagg, who is going to be the number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft, and Shedeur Sanders, who is just going to generate a lot of hype potentially with his NFL draft coming up. Now, Arch Manning. So Arch is the nephew of Cooper. So, sorry, Arch. Let me say that again. Arch is the son of Cooper. He's the nephew of Peyton and Eli.
That's right. Yeah.
And he was the number 1 overall high school player coming out in his class a couple years ago. My thought with Arch is, believe it or not, he actually has had cards out for almost the last 2 years. So he actually has a pretty established market as well, almost like Wembanyama. And on top of that, anytime he hits the field, which he's barely done, it's been Arch Madness. We've coined it Arch Madness at the Sports Card Strategy Show. And so I want in on more Arch Madness, and I think when it's going to happen is, what I want to happen is I want Quinn Ewers to finish out the season as the starter, to stay healthy, and for Texas to do whatever they do in the college football playoffs. Kind of doesn't matter. Then what I think is going to happen is Arch is going to be the starter going into next year. Texas is going to be ranked in the top 3 or 4 based on the fact that they're Texas. And because his last name is Manning and he plays quarterback for a top 5 college team, when he is named the starter going into 2025, it's going to actually come in full circle on us, Clark. It's going to be sell his you-know-what before the season starts.
There you go.
There it is. So hopefully it is a quick flip on Arch Manning to answer your question.
Makes sense. No, that's a good list. I enjoyed that episode. If you haven't listened to it, go to that episode on Sport Card Strategy Show. It's worth a listen for sure.
Thanks, man. I look forward to talking to you again soon. And thanks everybody for tuning in.
Hey, thanks for listening to Cards to the Moon. We'd really appreciate you subscribing to our podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also connect with each of us on Instagram at 5cardguys, or you can follow Hyung at Integrity Sports Cards, or John at TradeU at Recess. You can also check us out at 5cardguys.com. Thanks again, and hope to connect soon.